The death of Pope Francis on April 21, 2025, marked the end of one of the most debated and emotional pontificates in modern Catholic history. For many, it closed a chapter of openness and dialogue, a season where the Church seemed willing to step into conversations that once felt off limits. But for others, it was not a season of hope at all. It was the last warning bell before something far darker. Beneath the surface of mourning, behind the solemn beauty of Vatican funerals, there are whispers of a plan that has been in motion for decades. Not a plan born overnight, not a sudden coup, but a slow and deliberate effort to reshape the Catholic Church into something almost unrecognizable, something Catholic in name only. For years, this plan has moved quietly. It has not shown itself through open attacks on the Church's traditions. Instead, it has worked like a steady stream wearing down rock, not by force, but by slow erosion. With the Pope's death, the Catholic Church enters the period known as Sede Vacante, the empty seat, and with that, the stage is set for the next conclave. But this conclave is not like others. This one may not simply choose a new leader. It could choose the final architect of a transformation that has been studied, organized, and prepared for decades. Far from Rome, far from the eyes of most Catholics, a small group of bishops and cardinals used to meet in the Swiss city of St. Gallen. They were known as the St. Gallen Group by some, and the St. Gallen Mafia by others. They were progressive church leaders who shared a vision of reform, one that would touch the deepest roots of Catholic teaching and practice. The group included powerful names: Cardinal Carlo Maria Martini, Cardinal Godfrey Daniels, Cardinal Walter Casper, and Cardinal Karl Lehmann. Their meetings were not about small talk or theological debates for curiosity's sake. According to Daniels' own authorized biography, they discussed real strategies, ways to increase collegiality in the Church, to reduce the authority of the Vatican's central offices, and to push forward on controversial topics such as sexual morality and the role of women in the Church. What made them especially influential was not just their ideas, it was their desire to shape who would lead the Church. They reportedly worked to prevent conservative candidates like Joseph Ratzinger from becoming pope, and they supported more progressive figures, such as Jorge Mario Bergoglio, who would later become Pope Francis. Journalists such as Giulia Meloni, in her book The St. Gallen Mafia, have claimed that this group played a key role in Francis' election in 2013, steering the conclave toward a candidate who would advance their reformist vision. Not everyone welcomed this influence. Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, one of the most outspoken voices against the group, has accused them of orchestrating a plot to undermine the Church's traditional doctrine. Cardinal Robert Serra has warned of a diabolical plan aimed at breaking the tradition of the Church, especially attacking the traditional Latin Mass. For Serra, such a plan would erase the sense of the sacred, distance the faithful from authentic worship, and reduce the faith to something purely human, no longer rooted in divine truth. This is why the coming conclave feels different. It is not simply about who will wear the white cassock next. It is about whether the Church will continue as she has for 2,000 years, or whether she will be refounded into something entirely new, a structure still carrying the name Catholic, but emptied of its core. Vigano has warned about what he calls the deep Church, a parallel version of the Church infiltrated by modernist forces. In his view, they are not working to defend the faith handed down by the apostles. They are trying to build a new religion, one based not on Christ's redemption, but on a vague, universal kindness. A religion that sounds compassionate, but quietly strips away the eternal truths that have always been at the heart of Catholicism. Cardinal Gerhard Muller has spoken of a great apostasy already underway. He has warned that some within the hierarchy are emptying Catholic doctrine of its meaning in order to make it compatible with a globalist agenda. He has even raised the possibility of an open schism, and according to many insiders, the candidates favored by the progressive faction are already prepared cardinals trained in the ideas of the St. Gallen Circle. Men able to speak the language of the modern world while quietly moving the Church further from her traditional teachings. If they succeed, it will not simply be a change of tone or style, it will be an irreversible shift. The Church could enter a post-Catholic phase, one where she no longer stands firmly in the truth of Christ, but instead serves the ideals of global humanitarianism. Reliable sources have pointed to figures like Cardinals Casper, Pagel, Zuppi, and Hollerich as carrying this vision forward. But as many have pointed out, the danger is not tied to individual names, it is rooted in the ideology they represent. Under such a pope, the Church's governance could change completely. The role of the Pope as the vicar of Christ might be diminished into something more like a moderator among bishops, each one increasingly independent and less tied to the unchanging truth of the gospel. Vigano has even suggested that this next pope could become the Pope of humanity, a religious figure who promotes a humanitarian faith rather than the Catholic faith, willing to sacrifice clear doctrine for the sake of worldly unity. Muller has compared this to a genetic mutation of the Church, turning her into something hybrid, no longer able to recognize herself. Under this vision, the blessings of irregular unions could be approved. Women could be ordained to the diaconate, with further steps toward the priesthood later. The Church could abandon her mission of evangelization in order not to offend other religions. Parishes could become more like community centers than houses of worship. The Roman liturgy could be set aside to make way for experimental, inclusive rituals that shift with the times. In such a church, truth would no longer be measured against the gospel, but against categories like inclusive or exclusive, modern or backward. Every last bastion of traditional teaching would have to be dismantled. Seminaries that train priests in the old ways would be targeted. Bishops who stand firmly in tradition would be sidelined, and the faithful who wish to worship as their parents and saints did before them might find themselves driven into a kind of internal exile, still Catholics, but treated like outsiders in their own church. This is the fear of many, that without divine intervention, the next pope might be not a shepherd guarding the flock, but the one who finalizes its dismantling. The new religion taking shape would be a shadow of the gospel. It would keep the language of faith, but replace eternal salvation with earthly satisfaction. It would trade revealed truth for compromise. Christ would no longer be seen as the king to be worshipped, but as an inspiring symbol for social causes. The liturgy would be stripped of mystery, doctrine would bend, morality would blur into whatever the world found acceptable. For Catholics who hold fast to the faith of their fathers, the choice would be clear and painful: resist or give in. Resist, even at the cost of being marginalized, isolated, and persecute, a door given to what some are calling the global apostasy, a worldwide abandonment of truth disguised as mercy. This is why the upcoming conclave is not just a church event, it is a battlefield. It can mark the moment when the long-hidden plan reaches its fulfillment, or, by the grace of God, the moment when it is stopped and a renewal begins. The St. Gallen group, or the so-called mafia, did not emerge overnight. Their origins trace back decades, to a time when the Church was facing internal questions about authority, tradition, and engagement with the modern world. Cardinal Carlo Maria Martini, often regarded as one of the most influential members, was a Jesuit deeply committed to dialogue, but his vision extended beyond simple conversation. He and his allies believed that the Church could only survive in the contemporary era by adapting, by reinterpreting its structures, its liturgy, and even its understanding of moral law. This approach, while framed as reform, alarmed many traditionalists, who saw in it a slow erosion of the very truths that had defined Catholicism for centuries. The group's annual meetings in St. Gallen were careful, strategic, and private. They were never meant to be public spectacles. Over coffee tables and private rooms, the members would discuss the future of the Church, reviewing candidates for future conclaves, and analyzing how the hierarchy could be influenced to favor their vision. By focusing on progressive cardinals and potential reformist leaders, they were shaping not just who would be pope, but the very trajectory of Catholicism in the 21st century. For them, the end goal was clear: a church that spoke the language of the modern world, one that could be both influential and adaptable, but at a cost. This cost, critics warned, was the loss of doctrinal clarity and the dilution of the gospel's eternal truths.